Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show, we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Moon Knight. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we're picking up in the aftermath of last episode, and as we can see inside the place where where Khonshu has been sealed away, he's not the only one. There are a handful of other gods, so it's like, what did those other gods do to warrant them getting locked up? And I wonder, are these gods here the only Egyptian gods that are free? Because it's like, right, you won't see any other avatars gathering, because you would assume, like, oh, you're going to gather everyone. So it is interesting, like, right, who are you guys to be the judge, jury, and execution of all these other gods? Once again, what did they do to warrant getting locked up? I'm assuming something of the same ilk as Khonshu. So that's interesting. I guess Amit's lucky that she has Arthur trying to awaken her, knowing... I think it speaks volumes that Amit is the one that's so far hidden away that the other gods don't know where she is. But, like, they have access to all the other gods they have sealed away. Regardless, I was curious to see what was going to happen to Mark/Steve and Steven's circumstances without Khonshu around. So... because I was wondering, like, right, Khonshu resurrected you, but I guess it's not like it's a continuous resurrection. I was wondering, like, without Khonshu around, would that do something to them? But it's like, no, their circumstances are set in stone. Once again, whether or not the whole multiple personalities, the dissociative personality, identity disorder, was already a thing before he met Khonshu, or was it after being resurrected? Still unclear, but... you would assume it existed beforehand, just because without Khonshu around, it's still active. But it could be, no, once it's done, and now that this has been set up, with or without Khonshu, that's always going to be a part of Mark. It's going to be the multiple personalities. So, I thought that was such an interesting thing, because, once again, I guess once you're resurrected, that's it. This is your one life. Granted, you have no suit, you have no healing properties. This time when you die, you die. So, I think that's potentially... where they're kind of leaving that at, you know? So I thought that was interesting, because I guess in my head, like I said, I thought it was like a constant state of resurrection. As long as Khonshu's power was there, it's what he was basically... I was thinking of Mark as like a moving corpse. That is like, cool, as long as you have Khonshu's power, you get to continue to live, but the moment Khonshu's gone. But it seems that that's not the case. There's the whole sequence at the beginning where... Layla kind of had to handle things on her own while Steven and Mark were both knocked out. So, she did her thing and ended up pretty impressive, especially not having any weapons on you. Just setting that situation off, like using that flare to like set off all that ammunition. Luckily that worked out. But now it is a situation of some interesting conversations and some really interesting adventure elements. I really like... we got it last episode, and we're getting it even more so this episode, the very, Tomb Raider-esque elements of it. I guess everyone's going to have their adventure. Like, obviously it all goes back to Indiana Jones, but me personally, I have way more experience with Nathan Drake than I do. I'd say, like, my experience would be, like, from most experience to least experience would be Nathan Drake, Lara Croft, and Indiana Jones. That's how it works for me. So I'm curious, because so it all goes back to Indy, but still. So, but I like that. It's like, solving, not necessarily solving riddles, but figuring things out, like examining stuff. And this is one of those. This is another episode where Steven gets to shine, and I do think that's such an interesting element of... obviously, it's mainly Steven in episode 1, a little bit of Mark. Episode 2 is still mainly Steven, but quite a bit of Mark. And then episode 3 is mainly Mark with a little bit of Steven. And now this episode is a lot of Steven with I love that back and forth. And I almost think it's almost poetic and interesting in a way that Mark constantly has to take mainly a backseat to Steven. The entire episode, Mark's like, no, come and give me the body bag. But Steven's like, no, we made a deal that when Khonshu was gone, he'd be gone too, yet he's still here. Which, obviously, Layla's like, oh, so you had that kind of deal in play, and what about me? It's like, well, he already kind of disappeared from your life, which even Layla couldn't fight. But you could tell it, like you see a little twinge in her eyes, just kind of like, it bothered her. But it's like, I mean, Steven had a point, so... But the problem is, and the complicated thing is, that Steven and Layla kind of hit it off. Like, and I've talked about this before. I want to say I brought it up last episode. Some conversations that people had about how Steven is probably like the person that Mark wishes he could be. The lovable idiot that shares a lot of the same interests and commonalities with Layla, that be more of a perfect pair to her than who Mark is. So I think this episode really leans into that, and just like the complicated nature of everything, of just like, you do anything, like you touch my wife or anything like that, you're done. But Mark is trying to appease to Steve and be like, right, at the very least, let me help. And you don't even have to do it for my sake. At the very least, do it for Layla's sake. Like, you don't have experience with this. But Mark's like, no, I mean, Steven's like, yeah, but this is my body too. It's all in the body, so it's got to be muscle memory. I don't think it's going to work like that under your circumstances, but still. You would assume the muscle memory would only kick in when it comes to the respective personalities that experience said thing. I would assume that's how it works for their circumstances, but maybe I'm wrong. But Layla, and I kind of like that Layla's, about to kiss Steven at one point in time. He was like, Mark pushed you away because of Khonshu. It's like, what? Khonshu wants to make you his next avatar, so that's the reason why. And she's like, why would you even tell me that? He's like, I don't know. I thought you had a right to know. And for Layla, it is this thing of, oh, well, you are honest, being honesty. And I thought that was cute. And then they do kiss, but it is this like weird, awkward thing. You're just it makes me uncomfortable because I'm like, because technically you're kissing another man's wife, but it is your wife. It's weird because even she's like, wow, you smell the same. Well, I was like, well, I mean, it makes sense. It's the same body. It's just different personalities. And it's just like, it's weird because I think she's kind of looks uncomfortable in her face because she's like, she was going to kiss him first, but he kind of took her by surprise, and he's probably never... It makes you wonder, like, right, has Steven had any experience kissing anyone before? Because it was like, right, we know the date situation at the beginning of the series, but I'm like, I don't know. And so, it's like, because he looked kind of awkward kissing too, and so that's why I'm like, it is this weird thing that it's like, but despite everything, you could tell Layla definitely likes him, especially when he gets down, we're following Harrow, and it's just like down there in the tombs and stuff, and it's just like, oh my god, he's like a kid in a candy shop, he's so excited, and obviously we learn a little bit more about Layla, like how her father was so, we talked about him a little bit last episode, but even more so this episode, about how he was willing to kind of give it everything he had to archaeology, like even if it cost him his life, which it did. But I thought was kind of an interesting element of the whole Eye of Horus situation and what it represents. I don't know why, maybe just my innuendo brain went crazy, because I thought, like, they languished on, like, oh, and this whole thing that spirals like this, it's the tongue. And they lingered on that a little bit. I was like, are they setting that for, like, a bit of an innuendo? But it's like, no, it's supposed to be the voice of Amit. It's like, oh, okay, so, like, an avatar. And jumping around a little bit, I do like the development where it's like, oh, the person buried here was Amit's avatar, their voice. Who was it? Alexander the Great. I was like, that's interesting. I like stuff like that where it's just like, yeah, take some like real world stuff and like, I mean, it's also that thing of like, yeah, like Norse mythology is a thing, and we have the Asgardians, but obviously the question has been, and some things in the MCU are like, no, they're not gods, they're aliens, and that's been a conversation about this too. Are we going to find out that the Egyptian gods aren't even gods? They're actually aliens. It'd be interesting if we find out like, no, they're actual gods. The Asgardians, yeah, they're aliens. But also, obviously, what Monday was the trailer for Love and Thunder, and obviously we're getting another pantheon. At least we're aware we're getting the Greek pantheon because of Zeus, but beyond that, we don't know what other pantheons we're going to get. So we've currently got 3 pantheons of gods. One group might not be gods, but you'd assume if that applies to Asgardians, it might apply to these others. Those are going to be the conversations. So it's going to be interesting how the MCU handles that, and really is like whether they put like a stamp down, because it's mainly been on the human front. They've been like, no, especially the MCU doesn't talk about it as much. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. sure did. It was like, they're not gods, they're aliens. Because Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was like, magic isn't real, you idiot. Read a book. Once again, I always go back to that Bo Burnham joke. But it's always that. Like, magic isn't real. What are you talking about? They're not gods, they're aliens. So I'm curious, like, I don't remember. Maybe it's been a little while since I've rewatched the earlier movies, but I don't think they've ever explicitly went out of their way to be like, Thor isn't a god. They're not real. They're aliens. I don't think they've... Maybe they've hinted to it, but like I said, I distinctly know Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. super went down the route of like, no, they're aliens. They're not actual gods. You know, so I'm curious to see how they handle their, you know, for now, it just seems like they're like, no, they're gods. Like the MCU prop, which I always feel like so, because of the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. thing, it always makes me feel weird having to say the MCU proper. It's just like, I hate having to say that. But regardless, what would be considered like the mainline continuity would it's still always treated them like gods, so we'll see if that ends up changing or not. But I went on this whole diatribe, but I really thought it was kind of interesting and thought like, oh, that's fascinating, which is like, right, considering all that Alexander the Great did, it made you wonder on some levels, like, so some of the stuff you did, the conquering you did, could that have been on Amit's behalf is what I was curious about. I was like, huh, interesting. Yeah. But regardless, I don't know why it still kind of throws me a little bit with like how bloody and meaty this episode was. For one, it's like, oh, is that fresh blood and human chunks? And it's like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't follow like the blood trail and bones. And then we see, they never even explained it either. Either that tomb has its respective like animated guardians, like zombie guardians. I don't think that was a Harrow situation. That was just kind of like, huh? Because his men were firing at... I'm assuming there's more than one then. Because we heard, like, even when that one got disposed of, there were still shots fired. So there's probably some, like, scattered all throughout the tomb. But it's like, yeah, those are, like, the guardians of the tomb and stuff. So I guess they just, like, activated the moment Harrow and his people popped in there. One of his gods got super rough. Got put on that sacrificial table, sliced open, and was like taking out his kind of, well, I think he was being embalmed. I think that's just like part of the mummification process, isn't it? What they were doing. I guess they just didn't get to the whole like, yeah, pulling your brain out from your nose aspect. So I did like that added like this like creepy supernatural element to it, especially when Layla was like crawling across the wall and that hand just like, because you see it like in the background, like in that little sliver crack, it just kind of like, you see it like as she's moving, it like jumps to the other side and then it pulls her into darkness, and it's like, oh, that was pretty rough when it's like she broke off its hand and it's like its bone is sticking out and it's trying to stab her with it. You're like, Jesus. Flare to the eye and toss it off the cliff. And it's like, yeah, that's enough to make you freak out. Because you're like, yeah, I was almost killed by essentially a mummy. And I almost fell to my death because that's a super far, long way down. And just Harrow's over there like, wow, that was impressive. She's just like, yeah, why does like men like you always have to be like, talk so condescending? And the moment he starts talking to her, he's like, right, he's going to get inside of her head. And he's like, oh yeah, I know about your dad. Because he's like, because of the scales, it allows me to see a person's sin and pain. And your husband holds so much more agony than one person should ever have to bear. And so that's what he's actually, with Amit's power, he's able to actually, it makes sense with the scale and stuff, but it's like, he's actually able to see the sins, because I guess those sins exist in you like memories, and that's what he's able to tap into. And even though there was so much chaos inside of him, it makes you wonder, I wonder, was it the Khonshu angle to it? Was it the multiple personalities? Or was it just because he did so many bad things that you'd think that make it easier to judge him? But I guess I would assume it has to be because of the multiple personalities, because like, right, Steven is kind of an innocent person, but the body isn't innocent because of the stuff that Mark did. And so it's like, it's two different souls to an extent, or multiple souls existing in the same body, so it makes it hard to like put those truly on the scale and everything. So, and now Layla just kind of walks away, and at the same time, Steven's examining the tomb and everything, which I love that. I mean, earlier Mark got Steven back for kissing Layla because he like took control of the body long enough to punch him in the face, and ultimately, he's like, right, like, you didn't have to, like, he was like, it was unexpected of you to do that. He's like, because I guess for him, it's like, right, obviously you like Layla, she likes you, but you still took the opportunity to kind of defend me. You didn't need to do that, but you felt, because despite everything, Steven realizes, like, yeah, Mark might be a douche sometimes, but at the end of the day, he does love and care about Layla, that everything he has done has been because since, like, Mark, I think Steven feels that about Mark, of, like, your feelings for her are sincere, and everything you do is for her sake. So he felt wrong, where it's like, right, you shouldn't hate your husband for this, because he legitimately is trying to help you and protect you. But that's also Layla's thing of, like, right, but you're not giving me a choice. I should be given the option. I don't need to be protected. Let me make my own decisions. So she ends up confronting Mark. And so it turns out Mark didn't kill her dad, but his partner did. And that partner is dead. Well, did he say that he killed his partner or no? He was left for dead, and he was like, I should have been dead, but I tried to save your dad, but I couldn't. I'm sure that's going to rub Layla the wrong way too. It's like, right, so, because he didn't really go into it too much, but if he had really gone to, like, he just said, like, right, I should have died too. So she probably didn't really have time to process, like, right, so you got to live after you brought the guy who murdered my dad to my dad, and, oh, that's how we met too. You tried to tell me the first time we met, but couldn't admit your guilt over what happened. Even though you didn't pull the trigger, you're still responsible because you were part of the squad. You brought that person to my dad. And now it's like, wow, our entire relationship is built on a lie. Once again, like she said last episode, every time I turn around, I'm learning more and more about you. And now I find out you were connected to my father's death. And that's the only reason why we got together in the first place, is because you were trying to clear your guilty conscience, and now it's like our entire relationship is based on a lie. So, but despite everything, he ends up staying behind to give her time to get away, and Harrow ends up shooting him in the process, and he's like, right, I can't save those who don't want to save themselves. And the moment that happened, I was like, okay, so where we go? He's going into the light. I'm like, right, you don't have Khonshu anymore, so there's no healing. I'm like, are you going to get like a second resurrection? Like, what's going to go on here? And so, in that moment, everything goes white, and then the whole, what was it, Tomb Buster. I love it. No copyright infringement. It's not, there's no, there's no tomb raiding. There's tomb busting. But very like Indiana Jones-esque, and then it's like, oh, you're Dr. Stephen Grant, and I'm like, what? And then like it zooms out, and it's like, okay. Once again, I like that angle a lot of like, okay, so there's actually an episode of Buffy I know that's very much like this, where it's like, oh, Buffy, like the entire series of Buffy, it's like, oh, is this actually real, or are you locked up in a medical facility, and this is all inside of your head? They kind of give an actual answer to that by the end of the episode, but it's like, oh, that's a whole conversation. But obviously, once again, making the Legion comparison of like, oh, like, how much is real and how much is in your head? I was like, but when I was looking down, I was like, there's still quite a few minutes left in this episode. I was thinking like, right, once we get to the realization of like, oh my god, this might all be in my head, I thought we were going to cut, and that'd be something we like delve into and stay in that the entire next episode. It's like, nope. That was brought up and not resolved, but immediately goes like, no, there's more going on here. But I do like, obviously, some familiar faces. We see Donna. I think one of the, obviously, the two that who look after him, like two of the nurses at this facility are the two cops. But I want to say, and maybe I'm mistaken, isn't one of the people in that room the same guy that got gutted by that mummy earlier in the episode? But I thought that was so interesting, and I love that his Steven's buddy, who's gold statue guy, is up there like doing bingo and stuff. And I love that it also there's Layla being like, oh my god, you won. She's like, I promise I'm gonna share with you this how much. I'm like, oh, so you've taken his bingo card before and took his winning spot and saying, no, this time I'll share with you. That's kind of interesting. It's like, we won. I thought that's kind of a neat parallel, but also knowing like, right, the Moon Knight you've been seeing, it's a toy. And so it's like, right, Stephen Grant came from a movie that you're watching like all the time. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And Mark's like, Stephen? And it just seems, and then he talks to Harrow, who's a psychiatrist, and it's like the cane and the statues. Can we even see at one point someone was drawing something and it looked like a bird that has the beak and skull of Khonshu, and you're like, okay, interesting. Like I said, I thought we were going to stay in this like the entire next episode, which is an next episode I'm sure is going to delve into that. But I really love how it is kind of this thing of like, wait, is this what's happening? Because like I said, that transition into, I'm like, whoa, what are we doing? Because like that transition into like the movie, I was like, that's some WandaVision level stuff. I was like, wait, what? And so the moment this was all done, like Mark ends up making his escape and hiding, and there's someone banging on a sarcophagus. I was like, inside of a sarcophagus, I'm like, okay, that's going to be Steven, isn't it? And I love that they're so happy, like, Mark? Steven, you're Mark! And they're hugging each other. What's going on here? And I'm like, and the moment they leave, I'm like, this is interesting. And they walk by another room, and there's a door open, and there's another sarcophagus, someone's banging. I'm like, is this place your mind palace? Is this where, like, in every room, there's going to be a sarcophagus that has a personality in it? So you're like, right. So I'm assuming, because the door's open, that's got to be the third personality, right? Because we've had that conversation last episode about like the third personality, and it's something I didn't realize, and I've heard other people talk about it. The kind of strobing effect that happens when Mark or Steven passes out. That's not them switching with each other, because it's such a clear point now that I've heard people point it out. I'm like, oh yeah, anytime we've actively seen Steven and Mark transfer to each other, it's always been a seamless transition. Whether it was like going from Mr. Knight to Moon Knight in episode 2, like it was just kind of like a no strobing effect, and it just the suit shifted, and that's it. His eyes lit up, and that was about it. And in episode 3, when he was staring at the mirror, and he was like, all right, going from Mark to Steven. So the strobing effect is the third personality, because I guess it's such because it's a personality they're not aware of, so I guess it's such a brute force way to the surface. So I guess because he's brute forcing his way to the surface, it's like catching both of them off guard, and why it kind of transitions the way it does, because I think it's kind of, at least from Steven to Mark or Mark to Steven, it's kind of almost this natural transition where this third personality, whoever they are, is a very, once again, brute force, unnatural transition. And I think that's why that strobing effect is the way it is. So once again, I never realized that, and like, because the entire time you're thinking like, right, it's Mark that kept coming out during those. It's like, no. The more violent personality, whoever that is, which the way people have talked about one of the other personalities, was it Jake Lockley or something like that? This doesn't seem like it is. I mean, but once again, it's the MCU. It's going to change stuff from the comics. He has a large assortment of personalities, but from what I've heard of people who are more familiar with the character, they're not quite sure. I mean, at least from the podcast I've listened to, no one's quite sure who this third personality is. So it could be a personality made specifically for the show. It could just be like, oh no, this is Jake, but they're tweaking his character from what it was in the comics to what it is now, so because apparently Steven is kind of close to who he is in the comics, but he's more of a focus than he typically might be, because he's supposed to be like the lovable idiot goofball personality, just like he is in this. But that was really interesting. Like I said, knowing like, wait, so every room potentially has a personality, because I actually don't know how many personalities, and I'm sure it probably ranges from like who's done a Moon Knight run. I'm sure that kind of changes from time to time, because I think even the multiple personality thing, I don't even know if that's always a consistent thing with Moon Knight. This element to the episode, though, I've heard people talk about, sometimes they're like, oh, is the whole Khonshu thing actually a thing, or is it just, no, he's just kind of, because the show is leaning more into the supernatural side of things, whereas some, I think, Moon Knight stuff doesn't. Because it's like, yeah, his suit in the comics is a suit. It's not the way it works in the show isn't how it works typically in the comic. I think more often than not, it is just like a suit he puts on. Very much, obviously the comparison that gets made is very Batman-esque. So he's usually just kind of like, oh, the whole Khonshu thing is kind of inside his head. Like, oh, I was resurrected by a god and stuff. It's like, sometimes that's what I think they're playing with in this regard. Maybe they'll kind of continue to lean into that next episode as well, but at the very least, it kind of, I think that's what that's supposed to be, like his mind palace, like his mind's way of compartmentalizing everything, because all of that would be too much for his brain, and his brain would probably melt. So he needs some way to subconsciously compartmentalize it, and I think this is his way of handling that. That he created all this to keep himself in check, not unless someone else did that to. It might not even be his design. It might not even be something he did subconsciously. It might be something Khonshu did to make things easier, or I don't know, because it seemed unfamiliar to Mark. So, because we see like what the world is like, it's kind of like a dark void for them typically. So this is probably their first time here. So this might be where they kind of like, this might be where the third personality typically is. Oh, I'm not in that dark void that Mark and Steven usually are when they're in talking to each other. It's like, no, like, because I'm starting to get, the best comparison to also make would be like Jane from Doom Patrol. If you've seen Doom Patrol, the underground, like it is a legitimate like subway underground that connects off into, everyone has their own little rooms and spaces down there. I'm assuming that this is what's supposed to be that, but it's one singular place, where it's like the underground it is too, but there's multiple areas in the underground. It's a super vast area, but it's all in like, it's a projection and manifestation of a place for all her personalities. So I think the same thing is like applicable in this case, but my point was, Mark and Steven are up the forefront, so like that whole dark void place they're in is probably where because they're the lead personalities, this is where they are, where every other personality is here and has to like bust their way out of this place to get to the forefront, to become the more dominant person. So, I don't know. It's definitely going to be interesting, because we also get the weird thing at the end where you're like, that looked like a hippo god being like, oh, hi, and I was like, no, because it can't be Amit, because Amit's supposed to be a crocodile, right? If I remember correctly. And I was like, that's a hippo. I was like, what? Legitimately made me go, what the hell is this show? I wasn't expecting something. I mean, we're delving into Egyptian gods, so I'm curious who she is and why she's here now. Is she another god that's going to be like, oh, I'm gonna help with the whole Khonshu thing, or what? Like, how do you get around the whole, like, yeah, you did get shot thing. You might not be dead. Maybe after they leave, Layla can help try and patch him up, and so maybe he's in that in-between space. Once again, maybe this isn't even his subconscious manifesting this, because why would he see all the stuff that he's been seeing, and just like I said, whether or not they'll really lean into the, oh, is all this in your head, or what? And then you have this god probably reaching out to him. Maybe she made this place so it's a little easier. Like, right, it'd be too much for your mind to handle, so I created this construct to make it a little easier, a little more digestible for you. I don't know. We'll ultimately have to wait and see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. I'm very excited to see what happens, because I don't remember who still had the Amit statue last. Was it Layla or was it Mark? Because Layla might have it. They might find Layla and she's captured, and by the time Mark/Steven comes back, I don't know. Got 2 episodes left, so it's definitely going to be interesting to see how this plays out. How do you free Khonshu? How's this whole Arthur situation going to be handled? Also, in the aftermath of this, like, how are the gods going to feel when they go like, oh, I guess we made a mistake? It's like, you think so? So, are you going to give Khonshu an apology, or what's going to happen? We'll have to wait and see. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.